My name is Elizabeth Isensee, and I love the outdoors, and I'm a big history buff, and both of those worlds meld in the story I have the privilege of reading to you today. In the archives of the Princeton Historical Society, I found these newspaper clippings from 1944. And in these newspaper clippings is the story of a canoe trip in 1887 up the Fox River with the author Reuben Gold Thwaites and his companion referred to as the Doctor. So, take a minute, slow down, and enjoy the sights, the sounds, and the characters of the Fox River as we go, starting in Portage, up the Fox River. Buffalo Lake. It was 2:25 p.m. yesterday when the Doctor and I launched the old canoe upon the tan-colored water of the government canal at Portage and pointed her nose in the direction of the historic Fox. You will remember that the canal traverses the low sandy plain which separates the Fox from the Wisconsin. In time of exceptionally high water, the Wisconsin overflows into the Fox, which is ordinarily 5 feet lower than the former, and canoes could readily cross the Portage afloat. In this generation, the Wisconsin is kept to her bounds by levees, but the government canal furnishes a free highway. The railroads have spoiled water navigation, however, and the canal, like the most of the Fox and Wisconsin River improvement, is fast relapsing into a costly road. The timbered sides are rotting, the peat and sand are bulging them in, and the locks are shaky and worm-eaten. And several moss-covered barges and a stranded old ruin of a steamboat turned out to grass tell a sad story of official abandonment. The scenic effects from the canal are not enlivening. There's a wide expanse of bog, relieved by some grass-grown railway side tracks, and the forlorn freight depot of the Wisconsin Central Road. A few battered sheds yet remain of old Fort Winnebago on a lonesome hillock, near where the canal joins the Fox, while beyond to the north, as far as the eye can reach, there is a stretch of wild rice swamp, through which the government dredges have scooped a narrow channel, about as picturesque as a cranberry drain. Life at Fort Winnebago during the second quarter of this century must have been lonesome indeed. Its nearest neighbors being Forts Crawford and Howard, each nearly 200 miles away. A mile or two to the southwest is a pretty wooded ridge, girding the Wisconsin River, upon which the city of Portage is now situated. Then it was a forest, and the camping ground of Winnebagos, who hung around the post in the half-threatening attitude of beggars who might make trouble if not adequately bribed with gifts. For a dozen miles beyond the Fox River end of the canal, the river, as I have before said, is dredged out through the swamp like a big ditch. The artificial banks of sand and peat are generally well grown, with mare's tail, beautiful clumps of wild roses, purple vetch, great beds of sensitive ferns, and masses of Pennsylvania anemone, while the pools are decked with water anemone. Nature is doing her best to hide the deformities wrought by man. The valley is generally about a mile in width, ridges of wooded knolls hemming in the broad expanses of reeds and rice and willow clumps. Occasionally, the engineers have allowed the ditch to swerve in graceful lines, and to hug closely the firmer soil on the lowered benches of the knolls, where the banks of red and yellow clay attain a height of 10 or a dozen feet, crowned with oaks and elms or pleasant glades. A modest farmhouse now and then appears upon such a shore, with the front yard running down to the water's edge. The afternoon shadows are lengthening, and farmers' boys are leading their horses down to drink after the day's labor in the fields. Black and yellow collies are gathering in the cows. Some of them soberly and quickly corral obedient herds, while others yelp and snap at the heads of the affrighted animals, and in the noise and confusion seem to make but little progress. Collies have human-like infirmities. We had supper at 7 o'clock under a tree which overhangs a weedy bank, with a high pasture back of us, sloping up to a wooded hill, at the base of which is a cluster of 3 neatly painted farmhouses, whose dogs bayed at us from the distance but did not venture to approach. A half-hour later, the sun's setting warned us that quarters for the night must soon be secured. The river now takes upon itself many devious windings and a great widespread over 2 miles broad. The government engineers have left it in its original crookedness, and the twists and turns are as fantastic and complicated as those of the Teutonic pretzel in its native land. As the twilight thickened, great swarms of lake flies rose from the sedges and beat their way upstream, the noise of their multitudinous wings being at times like the roar of a neighboring waterfall, as they formed a ceaselessly moving canopy over our heads. It was noticeable that the flies kept very closely to the windings of the river, as if guided only by the glittering flood beneath them. 2 miles below the deserted house, we stopped opposite another marshy bank, where a rude skiff lay tied to a shaky fence projecting out into the reeds. Pushing our way in, we reached in the slimy shore mud and scrambled upon the land, where the tall grass was now as sloppy with dew as though it had been rained upon. It was getting quite dark now, but through a cleft in the hills, the moon was seen to be just rising above a cloud-bathed horizon, and a small house, neat-looking, though destitute of paint, was sharply silhouetted against the lightening sky at the head of a gentle slope. By the time we had waded through a quarter of a mile of thriving timothy, we were wet to the skin below the knees and dusted all over with pollen. Now this is where we are missing two of the Princeton-Times Republic newspapers. They would be from March 9 and March 16. So we don't know what happened over probably 2 days of travel. From Portage, we just go straight to Buffalo Lake. So go through your archives, see if you have these newspapers, because we at the Princeton Historical Society would be so indebted if we got those. And I will make sure you get like a gold sticker or something. That's probably all we can afford at the Princeton Historical Society is a gold sticker, but I will make sure you get it if you can find Princeton-Times Republic newspapers from March 9 and March 16. Now we go right up to Buffalo Lake. By 7:45 this morning, the storm had ceased and the eastern sky brightened. Our kind friends bid us a cheery farewell. See, we don't know who their kind friends are. We need these newspapers. We retraced our steps to the corn crib. The boys helped us down with our load, and just as our watches touched 8, we shoved off into the stream and were once more afloat upon the serpentine trail. These great wild rice widespreads, sloughs the natives called them, are doubtless the beds of ancient lakes. In coursing through them, the bayous, the cul-de-sacs, are so frequent, and the stream switches up upon it such unexpected tangents, that it is sometimes perplexing to ascertain which body of sluggish water is the main channel. Marquette found this out when he ascended the Fox in 1673. He says, in his relation to the voyage, "The way is so cut up by marshes and little lakes that it is easy to go astray, especially as the river is so covered with wild oats, wild rice, that you can hardly discover the channel. Hence we had good need of our 2 guides." Little bog islands, heavily grown with aspens and willows, occasionally dot the seas of rice. They often fairly hum with the varied notes of the red-winged blackbird, the rusty grackle, and our American robin, while whistling plovers are seen upon the mud spits, snapping up the choicest of the snails. And such bullfrogs! I have not heard their like since when a boy living on the verge of a New England pond. They tell us that on the Fox River the frogs say, "Judge Arndt, Arndt, Judge Arndt." Old Judge Arndt was one of the celebrities in the early days at Green Bay. He was a fur trader, and accustomed with his gang of voyageurs to navigate the Fox in Wisconsin with heavily laden canoes and Mackinaw boats. A Frenchman, he had a gastronomic affection for frogs' legs. The story goes, therefore, that unto this time, whenever a boat is seen upon the river, sentinel frogs give out the signal cry of "Judge Arndt," by way of deadly warning to their kind. Certain it is that the valley of the Upper Fox, by day or by night, is resonant with the bellows of the amphibious bull. Add to the countless chatter and whistle of the birds, the ear-piercing hum of the cicada, and the muffled chimes from scores of sheep and cowbells on the hillside pastures, and we have ourselves an orchestral accompaniment upon our voyage. Our general course had hitherto been northward, but now eastward for a few miles, and afterwards southeastward as far as Marquette. Buffalo Lake is 7 miles long by 1/3 to 3/4 of a mile broad. The banks are for the most part sandy, and from 5 to 50 feet high. The river here merely fills its beds. Being deeper, the wild rice and reeds do not grow upon its skirts. Were there a 6 more feet of water, the Fox would be a chain of lakes, from Portage all the way to Oshkosh. As it is, we have Buffalo, Puckaway, and Grand Butte and more, which are among the prettiest of the inland seas of Wisconsin. The knolls about Buffalo Lake are pleasant, round-topped elevations, for the most part wooded, and between them are little prairies, generally sandy. The day had, by noon, developed into one of the hottest of the season. The run down Buffalo Lake was a torrid experience, long to be remembered. The air was motionless, the sky without clouds. We had good need of our awning. The doctor, who was always experimenting, picked up a flat stone on the bench, so warm as to burn his fingers, and tried to fry an egg upon it by simple solar heat. But the venture failed, and a burning glass was needed to complete his operation. Montello occupies a position at the foot of the lake, commanding the entire sheet of water. The knoll upon which the village is for the most part built is nearly 100 feet high, and the simple spire of an old white church pitched upon the summit is a landmark readily discernible in Packwaukee, 7 miles distant. There is a government lock at Montello and a small water tower. A levee protects from overflow a portion of the town which is situated somewhat below the lake level. The government pays the lock keepers $30 per month for about 8 months in the year and a house rent the year round. Tollage is no longer required, and the keepers are obliged to open the gates for all comers, even a sawn log. But the services of the keepers are so seldom required in these days that we find they are not to be easily roused from their slumbers, and it is easier and quicker to make the portage. Our carry at Montello was 2.5 rods over a sandy bank, where a solitary small boy who had been catching crayfish with a net carefully examined our outfit. Below the lock for 3 or 4 miles, the river is again a mere canal, but the rigid banks of dredged trash are for the most part covered with thrifty vegetation and have assumed charms of their own. This stage passes and the river resumes a natural appearance, a placid stream, with now and then a slough or perhaps banks of peat and sand, 10 feet high and fairly well hung with trees and shrubs. At this point in the journey, the author Reuben Gold Thwaites and his companion have made it all the way from Portage to Buffalo Lake, and now they are on their way to Lake Puckaway. You can go to the next video to hear about their journey through Lake Puckaway.